Hey, everybody, I am James M., and I am here today to talk about the 5 things that we do on a daily basis in recovery. And actually, for recovery from trauma and drama, conflict-oriented thinking, violence, I've added another one to the list. So the 6 things that we do, but I'll get to that. And let me just tell you what that list is first, and then I'm going to say something about each one. So this list was given to me in 1996 by somebody in a coffee shop on the Lower East Side of Manhattan when I was just getting sober. And they said, if you do these things every day, you'll stay sober. And I did. I've done these things on a daily basis and it worked. So I want to share it with you. Number 1 is meetings. Attend a meeting, plan your day around a meeting. Number 2, literature. Read 2 pages, no more, no less, 2 pages of some kind of recovery literature. Number 3, check in with your sponsor. Have a sponsor, check in with your sponsor, be working the steps with your sponsor. Number 4, connect with 2 other people in recovery. So that means phone call today, that other things. We'll talk about that. Number 5, prayer. Make it a part of your daily practice, some form of it, your own form. We'll talk about that. And number 6, and this is the important one for violence recovery or for recovery from trauma or recovery from acting out in other forms of addiction that you can't explain why you continue to act these things out. It's because there's trauma there. And processing triggers is number 6. So processing triggers is essential on a daily basis to recovering. And I'm going to talk about that. So those are the 5 things, now 6. And I'm going to start with meetings. Number 1, meetings. So there is an idea that is not a good one, I think, in recovery, that I will squeeze in meetings when they're convenient, when I can, That I have seen over my 30 years in recovery. That is a recipe for relapse, for frustration, for pain. And that's not a great success technique. What is a great success technique is to plan your day around your meeting. Make it your number 1 priority. Recovering from this behavior that you're struggling with, make that your number 1 priority. Because if you get that solved, everything else is easier. And if you don't, everything else is harder. So prioritizing the meeting that you're going to go to means that you're scheduling your day around that. So that's already become your number 1 priority. When am I going to get to that? How am I going to get to that? Where is it? Etc. Right? So that's really important. Very important. And in the beginning of recovery, it's difficult, right? Because other things seem to take precedence. The job, my boss is going to get mad at me if XYZ. I'm not going to be able to get this client, blah, blah, blah. My relationship, my partner will never accept this. I've got to be available for them all the time. Or there's a myriad of excuses, right? So that shift in consciousness that I will prioritize my recovery over everything else, and the physical expression of me doing that is doing these 6 things. And the first one is meetings. Plan to go to a meeting, speak in the meeting, get involved in the meeting, do service in the meeting, get a service position in the meeting, whether that's, in-person meetings, making coffee, or if that's phone meetings or Zoom meetings, being someone who's engaged in the timekeeping or helping to run the meeting in some way, or volunteering to stick around in the parking lot after the meeting to talk to other people. That's primary importance. Number 1, meetings. Number 2, literature, right? When I first came into Alcoholics Anonymous as a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, it was the AA Big Book, right? Just read 2 pages of that. Over the years, I went through that book many times. Then for me, it was the 12-step essays from Bill Wilson, and then moving on to other recoveries. Today, my primary book is the book in Violence Anonymous. And so we begin the 12 Steps of Violence Anonymous. That's a great spiritual book for me. But there are other recovery books. There are thousands of recovery books out there. The main point is that I'm engaged in developing my awareness around these behaviors, this disease, if you will, that's holding me back from having the life of my dreams, that's creating conflict, that's creating pain, disconnection, that's blocking me from meeting my needs on a daily basis and helping other people meet their needs on a daily basis. So raising my awareness through literature, looking for new ideas, discussing those ideas, thinking about those ideas, realizing, oh my gosh, I had never seen it that way before. Now I understand what's going on with me a little bit better, right? And by all means, if you're a voracious reader, don't necessarily stop at 2 pages, but the reason that 2-page constraint was in there is to develop consistency, because that is one of the most important things that you can do in behavior change, especially in recovery from any kind of addiction, whether it's process or substance, is to create consistency in your recovery, right? So 2 pages, that's pretty easy. Just read 2 pages, move on. So literature, that's number 2. Number 3 is sponsor. Check in with your sponsor. Get a sponsor, find a sponsor, check in with your sponsor, work the steps with your sponsor on a daily basis. And that's a tough behavior shift for a lot of people. But if you're early in recovery, my philosophy has always been check in with your sponsor every day. Like, we're bonkers when we come in to recovery. We're temporarily insane and we need help. And who better to help guide us through the little decisions than somebody who's been there before, who's had more experience than we have, right? And in 12-step, what's the word I'm looking for? We're incredibly gifted with the fact that there are people who will help us, who will sponsor us. And in a lot of programs like Violence Anonymous, it's harder to find a sponsor. Some people call, the programs where it's harder to find sponsors, the graduate programs, right? Where you have to work a little bit harder to find that person, to find the person that you can trust, to find the person you can engage with. But it's really important. So having that sponsor. So for example, one of the things that I've seen over my years in recovery is, the newcomer who comes in is like, okay, well, I'm going to let somebody know about the fact that I'm triggering here, or that I shouted at this person, or I blew up at work, or I rescued again and I acted like a doormat again. I'll let you in on that. But the rest of this stuff, that's, I'm going to deal with this. This is my stuff. And there's this idea that we somehow have our act together because we've accomplished certain things in life, or maybe we've, X, Y, Z, whatever the reasons are. We tell ourselves, no, I got this. And that's also a recipe for failure. If there's anything that I've learned over time, is that the smart people are asking for help. The ones who really want it are developing the ability to be vulnerable, right? To recognize vulnerability as a strength. It's actually one of the most courageous things that we can do. The problem with our lives, especially those of us who experience a lot of trauma coming into this whole recovery thing, is that we don't trust people. We were hurt by the people who were supposed to take care of us. We've been betrayed by the people who we gave our hearts to. Whatever the reasons, we don't trust people. And having a sponsor and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and asking for help and saying, I'm thinking about doing this at work. I'm thinking about sending this email. I'm thinking about sending this text. Can I read it to you? Will you look at it? That level of vulnerability, rather than, no, I've got this. I know what I'm going to say. I'm going to send this. I'm going to put this person in their place. And then, oh my God, created another drama, right? So asking for help, using that sponsor to ask for help. Now, sponsor's primary responsibility and role is to take us through the 12 steps. And that's where the spiritual awakening happens. That's how we transform. And it's so important to go through the 12 steps in any recovery program, especially in Violence Anonymous, because these tools are amazing. The tools that we have assembled are incredible. There are other tools that are really useful, but I can assure you, based on my own experience, I used most of these tools before I started working the steps on violence, power control, trauma, meeting my needs at the expense of other people, or meeting their needs at the expense of me. And I can assure you that I used all these tools violently. I didn't understand that it's not what we do, it's the way we do it that is the expression of violence or nonviolence. And the transformation happened for me in working the steps, because there's a process and we go through this process and we change. And then we're capable of using these tools in much different ways. Even though it's the same tool, we just use it in a different way. And the sponsor is somebody who can guide us through this process. So that's why sponsor is so important. Number 4, connect with 2 other people in recovery. So this is vital right from the get-go. Develop the muscles to pick up the phone and call people, even when things are going okay, or when you don't need help, but especially when you need help. Get on a text thread with people. Have some correspondence with somebody. If you're feeling great, check in and see how somebody else is doing. So we get out of our own self-centered stuff and we get out of our own obsession, and we can actually like listen to somebody else for a little bit and connect. The connection is so important. And healthy connection, it's one of our primary needs. Is one of the things we discuss in step 4 in Violence Anonymous is, the need for love and connection. So connecting with others, developing the muscles, developing the skills to have the courage to reach out, or show the vulnerability to reach out to somebody else or 2 other people on a daily basis, develops those habits. So connecting with 2 other people, right, every day. So we build those muscles, because there will come a time when there is a crisis where you really need to reach out to somebody, and you want to have developed a phone list of people that you reach out to, because this person won't be available and this person won't be available. And that's a good opportunity for anybody who's new in recovery to go, well, you know what? I give up. I tried. It didn't work. It's the program's fault, or it's whatever. It's their fault. Now I'm going to do whatever I want to do and, act out, right? So you want to have a list of people that you have reached out to, so that you can call the 3rd person or the 4th person or the 5th person. And I guarantee you, by the time you've called the 5th person and left a message about what's going on, even if you haven't reached anybody, you're going to feel different about it. You're going to feel different about it. You're going to understand. You're going to start to feel, oh my gosh, there are some solutions. I don't have to engage in this situation. I can remove myself from this situation. I don't have to deal with this today, right? So connecting with other people in recovery is essential. 2 people every day. That's number 4. Number 5 is prayer. Any kind of prayer, whatever prayer means to you, just do it. Just do it, right? Even if it starts with whining and moaning and, God, why did you do this to me? It's still some kind of connection, some kind of vibration that creates a connection with, a power greater than ourselves, if you will, right? Some form of connection. So something that someone taught me in early recovery that I still do is just, every time you go to the bathroom, pray. And it made it easy. And multiple times a day, I was praying. And then a lot of people say, hit your knees in the morning, hit your knees at night, get down on your knees and pray. It did, for me, create a level of humility that I needed. And so those are suggestions, but just some form of that. So those are the 5 basics. And then in recovery from violence, processing triggers is essential. My experience is we don't really recover if we're not only willing to do that on a daily basis, but if we don't quite know how to do that on a daily basis. So I wanted to spend a decent amount of time on processing triggers, because I think it's really important to neutralizing trauma. So think about it like this. A trigger is something that happens when we lose our mind. We become temporarily insane, right? So, and I'm talking about like the verb to, like, I've triggered, right? So when I've triggered, I'm having a conversation with somebody and they say something that I think a certain way about, or I take it personally in some way, and bam, I'm upset. Okay, that is being triggered. And when I'm triggered, if I engage while triggered, I cause damage. There's no way around it. Energetically, I'm sending out, I'm a victim, and now I'm going to do something about it. Whether I'm rescuing you by rolling over and, playing dead or being submissive, or whether I'm getting aggressive or I'm freezing, any of these reactions are what we do when we are triggered. So what do we do when we're triggered? First off, we need to recognize that this is one of the greatest gifts in recovery. It's not a problem that I've triggered. It's a gift. it gives us an opportunity to have insight into where our trauma is. And that is fundamental if we're going to change. If we're going to change the patterns of abuse that happened until we got to this moment, and we're not going to pass it on anymore. So recognizing that. So first thing we got to do is we got to de-escalate. Somehow we have to de-escalate. And there's a bunch of different techniques to de-escalate. The first and best one is to remove ourselves from the stressful situation. Immediately get some distance. And you can do that in, the best way you can. But then I'm not going to talk about every de-escalation technique, but a lot of people use different things. The deep breathing tool is a de-escalation technique. Tapping is a de-escalation technique. Even though I feel scared, I'm safe and secure. Even though I feel scared, I'm safe and secure. Even though I feel scared, I'm safe and secure. And going through the points and tapping, and doing that over and over. That's a de-escalation technique. Some people use it for processing triggers. We'll get there in a minute. Physical exercise can be a de-escalation technique. I used to get so upset that I had to go out. I hung a heavy bag on my son's swing set, and I had to go out and just punch it and kick it until I got the energy and the rage and the fear and the upset and the sadness out of my body enough to where I could do the next part, which is find a handle, right? So we de-escalate, and then we find the handle. What is the thought, the feeling, or the experience, or the image that I see in my mind about this situation that's causing me pain, right? And generally, when we find a handle, a good idea is to go, okay, so I see this image in my mind. She's being disrespectful, let's say. She's not respecting me. She's talking to me, so it's upsetting me. And okay, so that's the handle. And on a scale from 1 to 10, how upsetting is it? It's usually pretty high, 10. Okay. And what would I like to think about this? I'd like to think that I'm fine and I'm safe and I'm secure and this is funny. Scale from 1 to 10. How real does that feel? It's usually 0, right? Not even on the 1, not even just, right. Okay. So now we've got a gauge of kind of like how upset I am and where I am. So finding the handle, and there's more to that, but that's in general, that's what that is. De-escalate, find the handle, right? Maybe I have to make a phone call to somebody and explain the situation. And then they're like, oh, it sounds like you told me about something in your childhood. And now it sounds like this is the same pattern. This is the same thing. It's just happening as an adult. That's the handle. Okay. So now I've got the handle. Then there's process the trigger, right? Neutralize the trauma. And that's different from de-escalating. Calming down is one thing, but if you haven't neutralized the trauma, you're still walking around in a trigger. You're just, maybe it's a lower level trigger. Maybe your steam isn't coming out of your ears and your face isn't red and you don't want to explode and do something dangerous, but now you're in a low level trigger where you're just irritated or you're scared or you're jumpy or you're just and depressed, right? Those are, right? You're still triggered. So you find that handle. Now you go through the neutralize the trauma, processing the trigger. That's what we call processing the trigger. A lot of people talk about, oh, I'm processing. And they think thinking about the situation is processing. It's not. That's not processing the trigger. That's going through a thought process, but it's not processing the trigger. What is processing the trigger? Processing the trigger is actually using some modality, and they're popping out of the woodwork right now because brain science is moving very quickly. But I use EMDR, I use the TAT method, I use the reframing exercise. These work very well for me. And going through that process to get to a point where I have either hit the grief, I remember some experience where the root of this system, this process, this repetitive pattern has been playing out, and this is where it started. Bang. And I hit some grief pocket, boom, I'm neutral. Sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes it's just, okay, I feel calmer about this. I feel my creativity is starting to come back now. I can find a cooperative solution. So those are signs of knowing that the trigger has been processed. And all of this stuff is in the Processing Triggers pamphlet, which you can read, you can find on the VA website under the resources. And it explains, signs of being triggered, signs that the trigger has been processed. So once you've got those signs that the trigger has been processed and you're calm, now you've got an opportunity to use that gift of that trigger. You've found that trauma, you've eradicated that pain pattern, you're no longer repeating that or acting that out, and now you're changing. You're literally telling your mind, I am going to respond to these kind of situations differently now. I can do that now. I've just rewired my brain. And that is processing the trigger. And doing that on a daily basis is vital. Even, and I'm just wrap with this, even if I used to wake up triggered. So it was easy. I just wake up in the morning and process the trigger because I wake up triggered. Part of my abuse happened at night. I'd be woken up in the middle of the night and abused. And so I would wake up triggered in the morning. But doing it on a regular basis, even if you think you're not triggered, you can work on some limiting beliefs. But it goes back to that consistency, right? If we create a consistent daily practice in our recovery with these 6 things, I can assure you, you've got a much better shot at putting together days, months, years. I'm looking at 20 years coming up pretty soon here in Violence Anonymous, 30 years in AA next month. And it's because I've been doing these things. I know it works. So I hope that helps people. I hope that gives you some insight. I hope that helps you be a better sponsor. I hope that helps you be a better friend, parent, lover, child, better person on earth. I'm James M., and I appreciate you listening.